Now that Curacao is going global, I thought it would be a good idea to make a video in English explaining the cultural differences, the original inhabitants, and those that migrated throughout the years on the island of Curacao. Shalom al Khayyim, my name is Lisan Al Gayyib, and today I'll be teaching you the history of Curacao. So Curacao, as we know, it's within the Lesser Antilles. It's very close to Venezuela, but Curacao is also neighbors with Aruba and Bonaire. These are known as the ABC's islands. Now, here's the thing about Curacao that a lot of people don't know. When they hear Curacao, especially here in the Netherlands, they think of Africans. They mostly think, oh, it's just Africans, they're originally from Africa. This is completely wrong. If you look throughout the history, migration took place into mainland Venezuela. They started off by hopping on islands to islands, going from Trinidad, Tobago, and whatnot, and eventually reaching the islands of Aruba, and then going to Curacao and Bonaire. These people were Native Americans. But before the Native Americans came, there were also other indigenous groups that came way before the Arawak family branch. These people, they don't have a lot of information or historical evidence on them, but the theory goes as they came from 200,000 years ago when the Ice Age was there and they just kept going. But the Arawak branch family, they kept migrating throughout the years slowly. As they kept slowly migrating, they settled in Orinoco River in Venezuela. Eventually, the southern and northern tribes grew too much. So some of them went to the Amazon, and some of them decided to go in the Caribbean. They were skilled fishermen already. They had their own harvests, like cassava. They were eating rabbits, but their diet mostly consists of sweet potatoes, cassava, and fish, and other harvests. So what happened? They migrated in the Lesser Antilles and eventually going into Greater Antilles, like Jamaica, Hispaniola, which is Dominican Republic and whatnot. But now we're going to go to Curacao. So what happened with Curacao? Curacao was the second migration of the indigenous people of the Arawak branch family. Now, people confuse Arawak as, yeah, that's the tribe. No, completely wrong. This is the family branch. There are many, many more family branches in Arawak, like the Tainos, Caquetillos, and Wayu. The second indigenous group that came to the island was the Caquetillos. Now, a lot of people would say, yeah, but how did the Africans came to the island? Let me explain. So, before the Africans came, the pre-colonial era, you had most indigenous going around. You had caciques. Caciques were the tribe leaders. You had the chiefs of the community, of a neighborhood, you could say. And then you have a tribal leader that's above that, like the council. And on top of that, you have the highest of the highest cacique. That cacique will rule the island. So they will be from the top to the bottom, eventually going to community to the family. As you explore more throughout the history of Curacao, they had a lot of network connection with other tribes. Also, Carib, the indigenous people, Carib people, they used to go around and do raids, especially on these islands. But our culture goes way, way further. Our network used to connect to mainland Venezuela, where Aruba is the closest to them. But then you also have some Tainos coming all the way from there, from Jamaica to us. So we were skilled fishermen. We were skilled in these type of things. So we had our own cultural. Shamanism were the main religion in our cultural traditions. When a wedding would take place, what would happen? The family of that branch of the Arawak, let's say in Aruba, will come to Curacao, for example. So this is how it went. We traveled the ocean without having maps. We would look at the stars, look at the wind, look at the ocean. Because to us, these things were alive. The nature was alive. They spoke to us. They were nature spirits. They were entities, principalities, many things that played a role in the spiritual realm of the indigenous people of Curacao and the ABC Islands. But as we all know throughout history, with Christopher Columbus, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, they came to the island. The first people that arrived there were Spanish. So when the Spanish arrived, they were already at war with most of the indigenous tribes in that area. The caciques of Venezuela was the main cacique. He was the leader of the islands. But of course, you had their own cacique leaders on each island that ruled over the people. But the main cacique, the most head of them all, was the one at mainland Venezuela, because at the time, ABC Islands were under Venezuela, the rule of them. And what happened? So when the Spanish came, most of the time they would break off the treaty, because there were treaties that was going on for protection of the islands, because they saw the islands as products. they said, okay, we will take these indigenous people and bring them to Hispaniola. That's how most of us arrived to Dominican Republic and whatnot. We came from the islands to Hispaniola. And what happened throughout history, they start breaking up the treaties, war happened, the cacique of mainland Venezuela, of course, defended his people, and we were less people, and again, we're on a small island, so it was very difficult to defend ourselves. We fought to the very extent that we can. But the Spanish overpowered us throughout history because of how close off we were. And let's not forget, they had bigger boats. We had canoes. So the islands were small. They could easily take over it. They would circle around the island, and our protection would be cut off from the mainland. So this is how they took over. They took over also by letting donkeys come to the island and goats. These were not native animals to us. We came with our own animals. We had our own variants of eagle. We ate rabbits. We came with rabbits. We came with we used to eat a lot of fish because again, we were island, on the island. It was easy to get those resources. But they came, they destroyed our crops. We had a lot of fruits on the island. For example, on Bonaire, there's a fountain that the history goes they had all type of fruits in there, grapes, they had mangoes, they had all type of fruits, bananas. They brought that from mainland Venezuela to there and planted there. But throughout history, they destroyed our crops. So goats eat everything, donkeys also. They destroyed our crops, starved us, disconnected us from the mainland, and eventually people died out from starvation. People died out from illnesses, sicknesses, and these type of things. And they claimed the territory. The Spanish claimed the territory over the ABC's islands. But the Portuguese also had connections through the islands. The Portuguese also came, and after they took most of the indigenous people from the ABC's islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, what happened? They swept them up, took them to Hispaniola, and some of them stayed. By the 1600s, 1800s or so, the Dutch came. The France also tried to take over the island, but they failed because the Spanish had a lot of power. But in the 1800s or so, the Spanish started losing its wealth, its resources, its military power. Through history, you could see they went bankrupt. And because of that, the Dutch came over and they could have easily overpowered the Spanish and take the islands. So what happened? The Spanish didn't also visit the island frequently anymore. They only visited for food when they had no food. They took the crops and whatnot and go. So the Spanish left the island and the Dutch came and they said, hey, for example, Bonaire and Curacao, it's not inhabited by the people anymore. So what they did is they brought Africans. But when they brought Africans, the Africans came from West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Mali, mostly Yoruba, these type of tribes and people. They came from Africa to our islands. And what happened is that they didn't really blend it with our cultural traditions. They didn't really fit into the picture. But because we had so much damage that was done to us throughout the years, some of them took the women of the Africans and married through intertribal with these people in order to bring the indigenous people back. So you had half-breeds, but these half-breeds would stay and marry on with a full-blooded so they could have the indigenous back. So this is why throughout history, you also see that a lot of people claim that they're indigenous, but they're colored people, like very colored. I'm talking about like color of Africa. This is the reason why we have so many diverse people. Now, throughout the years, it came to be that Portuguese came, they settled as well, Spanish people, even people of Lebanon, you had Arab people, Al-Mansur, they came, Jewish people came, Sephardis Jews, they came. So throughout the years, they kept building up, persecution with the Jews. A lot of Jews came to the islands and Venezuela. This is not talked about. Middle Eastern, even some Moroccans came. So at the end of the day, it became a melting pot. But this is the history in short term. It goes way longer than this, but hey, I decided to make this video to give educational knowledge to those that was curious on the history of Curacao and the ABC Islands. I hope this helped. If you got any questions, shoot me a DM, and I'll be looking forward to make a part 2 of this video. Shalom Aleichem.